Hi, it's Emma again with more writing videos. Previously, we've gone over the basic structure for a general essay, and today we're going to move on to a more specific focus of AP Language and Composition. AP Language is a class that most people take in junior or senior year of high school. I took it my junior year. And before I continue, I have to give a shout out to my AP language teacher, Miss Kane, who taught me most of the stuff that you're going to be seeing in these videos, and I hope I can convey it in a way that would make Miss Kane proud and also instruct you in a similar way that I was instructed, because I found it very helpful, and I found that the class expanded not only on my writing skills, but my critical thinking and close reading skills. Without further ado, let us continue on to the beginning of AP Language and Composition. AP Language has a few kinds of essays that we're going to be covering. There is the analytical, the argumentative, and the synthesis. And today we're going to start by going over the analytical essay. In an analytical essay, which you will see both in AP Language and AP Lit, and honestly the way you break down both types of essays is going to be very similar, but an analytical essay will present you, the student, with a passage. In AP Language, it's going to be a nonfiction, so it would be a letter or a passage from a nonfiction book or perhaps a speech, and then you will be asked by way of a prompt to delve deeper and to discuss the way in which the information is presented and how it connects to a larger meaning and how specific parts of the language help convey that meaning. In this video, I will be going over a few general steps to consider before you start writing your essay, and then I'm going to make another video in which we review an actual essay prompt and how I would go about breaking that down and annotating and ultimately translating that into an essay. But it all starts before you even pick up a piece of paper to start writing your essay. A lot of the strength in an essay comes in the preparation, how you handle the prompt, how closely you read through your passage and your annotation, which all come together to give you a sense of deeper understanding than you would perhaps if you just saw the prompt, saw the passage, and then started writing. So before you write, you want to do a few key things. You'll want to look at the prompt. The prompt has lots of hidden information, and really it's not that hidden because it's right there for you to read, but people tend to give the prompt more of a cursory glance than it deserves. Next, you'll want to make a few general observations as you read through your passage. These observations include what the larger subject is, what are the smaller subjects within that topic. You also want to know your audience, particularly when reading a letter or a speech. The audience's relationship to the speaker is going to hold a lot of meaning for the rest of your essay, and it's going to drive potentially a lot of your analysis. You want to know the context in which your passage or your quote is set. You're not always going to know the time period or have a more detailed understanding of your speaker or author than the prompt gives you, but if you do know something extra about the time period, or if the prompt gives you any crucial details about the time period or the setting in which your passage is set, you want to take that into serious consideration. The next general observation you'll want to make about your passage as a whole, and these observations come in the prompt, in your first kind of feeling about the passage, in conspicuous language or things that really stand out to you in a first or second read through of the passage. Purpose. There's going to be a larger purpose to the passage that the College Board and your teacher are going to want you to probe at. You want to understand that there's going to be an overarching purpose, but potentially, and very often, there are also smaller purposes within the essay, so it's hard to sometimes differentiate and tell if what you're seeing is a smaller purpose or the overarching purpose that the AP is looking for. Next, look for the tone that is set by the author, which sometimes comes through only in a second or third or even fourth read-through of the passage, which is why my teachers have always suggested taking your time on the prompt, taking your time reading through the passage, making sure you understand it thoroughly, and if you don't, reading through it again. I have spent more time on the passage and annotating than on my actual essay before, and done fairly well on my essays because I understood the passage, whereas rushing into your essay without having a full understanding of the text can often lead to misinterpretation or confusion, or even worse, changing your mind halfway through the essay. So the tone is something that is hidden often, and that often takes a few reads to fully understand. Perhaps the most important part of this general observation is the argument. I'll put little dashes around it to highlight its importance. You want to know, what is the speaker trying to get across? What is their thesis statement? What is the point of their writing? Now that we've looked at the prompt and made some general observations, you're ready to go more into the specific analysis, the analysis that comes up as you read more closely and with a lens focused on the detail of the passage. Again, as you go through your passage looking for this specific analysis, the details of which I'll go over next, you're going to also want to remember that perhaps no one can catch everything on the first round or even the second, but the idea of going through multiple times and catching as much as you can and then determining what is important to write about, that is a very helpful process instead of just going through once. Because there's always something that you're not going to catch, and that's sometimes the most important part of the essay. So the analysis really has a foundation in close reading. So the first question you want to ask about your passage when taking a closer read and going through a more specific analysis is, what is the purpose of the author? Again, you want to get from more general to specific, in that you want to see what the general overarching purpose is, and that might be in a general observation, and to translate to what is the purpose of the passage, then what is the purpose of the paragraph in terms of the passage, then the sentence in terms of the paragraph, in terms of the passage, and then even specific words are going to be chosen purposefully in these kinds of prompts. And again, this is all going to follow our general to specific model. So there's going to be an overarching purpose to the passage, but that's not to say that you should ignore the purpose of those individual words, because an author will very purposefully pick out a word that will contribute to an overarching meaning. Next, in a close read, you'll also want to look for figurative language, such as similes, metaphors. Remember, simile is the comparison using like or as, and metaphor is just a comparison. Figurative language also includes imagery. Imagery is related to the senses. So is it describing something auditory? Is it describing a sight, a touch, a smell, a taste? Those are all parts of imagery, and oftentimes it will go into detail. The next crucial thing to look for in a passage is repetition. Repetition is going to be seen in almost any AP language or AP literature passage, analytical passage. So what will you see repeated? Words, sentence structure, that is the syntax will have parallelism in it, You can see repetition of images, you can see repetition of words, and if you have been practicing your close reading, you'll realize that I, in fact, repeated the word words. So, just a little test to keep you on your toes. But seriously, repetition is going to be seen in many, many different kinds of passages, different types of writing, and it's going to be something that you're always going to want to point out when you see it. Because repetition often reveals an emphasis on something. If you see a word repeated, you know that the author feels that that is an important idea. So, something to keep in mind is that repetition equals emphasis. You'll want to say in your essay, not just the author repeats the word butterfly, but you'll say the author repeats the word butterfly to emphasize the fact that he has made it out of a transformation. Next up is contrast. Now, contrast is going to be the factor in the essay that creates tension. And often you're going to see contrast in what my teacher described as a binary, a sentence or two in which images or words oppose each other. If there are two things that are the most important to look out for in a passage that are going to consistently be there, it's repetition and contrast. Look for things that oppose each other and that create this tension. The next thing to look out for are shifts. Now, shifts can be all over the passage. There can be 5 shifts in one passage, but because they're not going to be as blatant as these shifts, some things you want to look out for: shifts in tone, point of view, mood, or imagery. Shifts are exactly what they sound like. They are just a change in one of these 4 things. Actually, it could be something else too, but oftentimes it's tone. It's the way the author views the subject. And just a quick overview of tone versus mood. So tone is going to be what the author is feeling. It's the author's attitude towards his or her subject. So the attitude may be stated or it may be implied. Oftentimes there will be an underlying tone of irony. The author is poking fun at a subject, and that's something that's hard to catch, but oftentimes be a disparity between the expectation of the reader and the reality of the passage, and that's what creates irony, and that would be an example of tone. However, mood is going to be how the subject feels about his or her own situation. If the character is unhappy about the situation, that does not necessarily mean that the tone is also somber. The tone could be poking fun at the character for feeling sad, or the tone could be expressing a greater meaning about the sadness. The tone and the mood are completely separate, and oftentimes there's going to be a shift in tone, a shift in what the author's feelings are within a passage, and those are the things that you want to look for and point out, because it shows a depth in reading and a depth in understanding that will reveal an extra layer of thought to your reader. And again, the tone can be very complex. The whole point of these shifts is that there can be many different changes in attitude, and catching on to all of those is what's going to make for a complete understanding and a strong essay. Again, these contrasts and shifts all create a sense of tension, and it's your job as the writer to sense this underlying tension and to tease it out and to make something of it, to tie that back to the bigger purpose. Some other devices to look out for when you're reading through your passage are appeals. They're not apples. Appeals are commonly seen in speeches and other kinds of letters directed to an audience, in which someone is trying to make an argument and to convince their audience of their point. And there are 3 different kinds of main appeals, and there are 3 ways of connecting to the audience. A convincing argument often employs all 3, and a wonderful example of this is Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from a Birmingham jail, because he employs all 3 of them quite tactfully, and it's definitely worth reading just for the sake of reading something that is beautifully written. So the first kind of appeal is pathos. Pathos is going to connect to the reader's emotion. It's going to be an anecdote or something that evokes in the audience a sense of pride, of fear, of guilt, of shame. Sometimes commercials come on the TV with a Sarah McLachlan song in the background with droopy-eyed puppies telling the viewers about all the abused and abandoned dogs in the world. Those commercials are almost explicitly relying on pathos, and as I have learned, and I'm sure many of you have, that is oftentimes a very, very strong form of convincing an audience. Next, we have logos. And because my artistic skills leave much to be desired, I've drawn an arrow to this man who, if you can't tell, has a brain coming out of his head with no top on his head. And that is to represent a brain, or logic, logos logic. Logos is going to appeal to the fact-oriented side of your brain. It's going to use statistics and numbers and logical reasoning to convince the audience. This often goes well in conjunction with pathos and our final appeal. Ethos is what gives the author or the speaker some credibility. It convinces or attempts to convince the audience of the speaker's credibility, their soundness of character, the reason the audience should be listening to them, and the reason what they say has some authority behind it. So if I am discussing chemistry and I'm in a debate with someone and they say, as a PhD from Harvard in chemistry, that would be providing them with some ethos. The audience might say, hey, this guy really knows what he's talking about because he has the credentials, and therefore he's probably worth listening to more than this person who doesn't have those same credentials. We've kind of gone through the basic things to look for in an analytical passage, but the really important part of looking through a passage is connecting this device that we've pointed out, this contrast, this repetition, or, imagery, and connecting that to meaning. Because in the end, what you want is to have an essay that both discusses the devices and how they relate to the overarching purpose. So one way to go about doing this that I've been taught is this helpful little T-chart. And it's just something to remind you that both of these areas are there and that they're both important and that they're related. So let's say the coach noted that the boy was as flexible as an aging goat. Here, my device is simile, because I'm comparing the boy to the goat using this as construction. Well, my meaning would elaborate on the importance of this quote. I might say, this comparison to the goat revealed the small amount of flexibility that the boy has. That is the analysis. It takes a quote and it explicitly explains the meaning behind the quote. Another thing that I could say about this is that there's humor in the disparity between the expectation of flexibility, because it starts off saying that he is as flexible as, and then the reality of this image of a clunky old goat, and the idea that the boy is not flexible at all. So I know people who on their prompts actually write out this T-chart to help remind them and really nail in the idea that you have to connect the device that you're noticing to the meaning, and that's what analysis is. So now we've gone over the 3 basic things that we should look at before even starting to write an essay. The prompt, making general observations about a passage, and then 3, the in-depth analysis as you read. Again, I'm suggesting, and sometimes people can read through once and understand the passage immediately, and some people need 10 times to read through. I would suggest reading through the passage at least 2 or 3 times to get the most in-depth reading that you can. And that will translate to having a stronger analysis. And I know that this video has been kind of abstract with suggestions and ideas on how to prepare for an essay. And so next, I'll be going over an actual essay. Look, you can see it right here. So if you want, you can pause this video and take a few minutes. This is 2007 Form B, the AP Language and Composition test. You can Google it and get this prompt, and maybe it would help if you went through on your own and kind of annotated this prompt or wrote an outline for how you would approach this essay. And next, I'll be going over how I did approach it and how I would go through the prompt and how I would go through the passage, and then how that would translate into a thesis and an essay in general. So maybe go through that essay really quickly, keeping in mind these 3 suggestions for what to do before you proceed into an essay, and we'll be back for more on this specific prompt in the next video.